members of Welcome to the Pop Culture Cult. I'm Sean.
I'm Janice.
And welcome to our discussion and review and straight out just admiration for episode 10 of the Andor series. This one was called One Way Out.
One Way Out.
Forward.
Hopefully, yeah.
The way out is forward. This is the monologue episode. There's two major monologues in this episode. The prison break happens, which we all kind of felt like it was coming this way.
Right.
We got some Luthen. We've been desperately missing Luthen. But what do you think of this episode overall before we kind of get into the nitty gritty of everything?
Well, I mean, I liked it. Are you gonna say you didn't?
I'm trying to taper my initial "that was amazing" with last week was amazing too, and so
last week you said you didn't know how you felt about it.
My initial reaction to that episode was I didn't know how I felt about it, but by the time we got done talking about it, I was definitely like, okay, this is really good.
Okay.
And then definitely by the end of the week before this episode, and I got to kind of listen to some of the other people talk, my feelings were justified.
Okay.
Because not because of anything outside of some of the things that were brought up in the episode last week. Were things that are deeply enrooted in Star Wars, wrapped up in this very different kind of perspective. And my initial reaction last week was, I think I really like this. I'm worried about the discord that's going to be around it, that it's not pew-pewy space wizards and stuff like that.
Well, they can all go somewhere else. Try to keep PG.
But a little bit of it too was, I mean, we were deep within House of the Dragon.
Yeah.
And last week's episode felt very much like a House of the Dragon kind of episode, where the entire last three episodes of this arc to get to only 12, no more than 12 at a time line.
Yeah.
Was all about dialogue and setup and cranking it up and slowly cranking it up.
Yeah.
And when we finally get the release of Kino saying no more than 12,
yeah,
it was jarring to me. And so this week, okay, the action stuff was the actual prison break, but there was more important sentences in this actually episode than there was last week.
Right, but I mean, again, I think that's part of they're in prison, right?
Right.
They're trying, the writers, creators, whatever, are trying to, besides ratchet up the tension, also kind of convey the desperation, boredom, struggle to find out anything,
right.
that these guys are kind of going through. So it's a lack of dialogue or nothing happening is you're getting a sense of what it's like for them.
And I think some of that episode too was about the reaction to more of the reaction to what's going on in the episode by the characters. And this one is the characters actually taking their own action instead of receiving stuff, receiving information, receiving punishment, receiving all that stuff. It's them actually being on the front foot, going forward.
Right.
Like I was saying, like kind of joking earlier, we're finally doing something. We're
right.
And for me, as an audience member who understands what they're trying to say within Star Wars themselves and in the show, I was like, it's about goddamn time.
Right. But if they hadn't kept ratcheting it up over the last 3 episodes, you'd be like, oh yay, they're getting out. But this was
when are we going to start to realize that the Empire is bad?
Patience, Padawan.
Patience is not a virtue for me. I am many things, but patience is not one of them.
No.
But I feel very satisfied with my ability to allow that to work itself out to a point where we got no more than 12.
Yeah.
And then this episode picks up right after they take Olaf like right through the night shift.
Oh, right.
Which is just from a point of view of the Empire, it's a show of force. It's a show of, be in your best behavior. This is gonna be you,
right?
Like I totally get
even
that.
though they had nothing really to do, they didn't kill him,
right? Even the doctor had that look of this is dumb, but
yeah,
I understand but picking up from there, and then picking up from Kino and Cassian changing their clothes and taking their shower, like from one episode, I'm really interested to go back and binge this.
Yeah.
To watch that transition from the last episode to this episode.
Because it's like one just continuous
episode. Yeah. I wish there was an option when you are. I'm giving out trade things. Disney Plus, Netflix. If you want to do this, I wish there was an option where you ever watched a movie and thought like, this is just visually amazing, and I just love the way it looks, and the colors are amazing. Well, our friends over at Movie Palette have come up with these great pieces of art that you could put up on your wall to show your love of movies without really necessarily being overly dramatic about it. Think of a movie barcode kind of thing, where you can look at the colors and know what the movie is, but it's very, very subtle. If you know us, we are into Tron Legacy. The music and the lights and the color itself is just amazing. Just to give you an idea of what they have. Go to moviepalette.com, find your own personal favorite movie, your movie color palette, and have it hang on your wall. At checkout, put in Pop Culture 15 to get 15% off. Thank you, Movie Palette, for sponsoring this video. Link is in the description down below. And don't forget, use Pop Culture 15 at checkout to get 15% off your order. You could not skip the credits, but it automatically rolls into the next episode.
Yeah.
Especially with something like this, where you're telling one continuous story over a year time period within the universe.
Yeah.
It's something else that we're kind of dealing with. We're doing our 4th rewatch of Stranger Things this year because we have issues. And that there's multiple times when I wish that the tension from the previous episode is instantly continued on. I have to work my way through the, do you want to skip to the next episode? Yes, I want to skip to the next episode.
Well, I mean, not to get into, everything but this actual episode, but Netflix does actually, they've got the whole little bar thing. I mean, it gets in there pretty quickly.
It gets in there pretty quick. Okay, so let's talk about Cassian and Kino, and Kino coming to the realization that, like, we're going to die here. Yeah. And so if we're going to die here, then you're right. We need to do something about it.
And I appreciate that it wasn't an instant flip of the switch for him going from I'm the floor manager to I'm a rebel, right? He had a moment of adjustment. You know, he was having a small breakdown in his cell before he finally came to grips with the fact that he was going to die one way or the other.
You know what? Andy Serkis needs all the freaking job. Like, he is once again proving he's one of the best actors working right now.
Yeah.
But his
facial
expressions, which is why Gollum was so amazing, right? Because they just used his face. But his transition from I just lost a friend and I just came to the realization that I am never getting out of this place, even though I only have 214 days or 214 shifts left or whatever.
Right.
And so he's having to deal with all of that. His whole world has been shattered.
Right.
So him and Cassian going at it in the changing room is amazing. It's so well done that Cassian's like, this is our shot. This is our chance to do it. We have to do it. And Kino's not there yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Kino, understands that something has to happen. Deep down, the light bulb has gone off.
Yeah.
He knows something has to happen, but he's not emotionally, mentally there yet.
Yeah.
He needs a freaking nap.
Yeah.
and when they wake up from that nap, like before they even go in, like the exchange between Cassian and Kino, the biggest thing that comes out of that is Cassian telling Kino, I'd rather die trying to stop them than die giving them what they want.
Right.
That is the definition of the rebellion.
Yeah.
Period. Hard stop. And Luthen says it's essentially the same thing later on in the episode.
Yep.
And so like that whole exchange back and forth, and then they go back to the cell building, and Cassian's like poking at Kino. Kino's not there yet, but Cassian's like, you got it. This because Cassian is Cassian. But when Kino finally says, "Everybody shut up," and the room goes quiet, it shows that he's the Mothma.
Yeah.
Of this cell block.
Yeah.
And ultimately of this part of this prison.
Right.
And it's not until the morning when he gets up and says, "Okay, we're not all going to make it." And he uses Cassian's line of, "I'd rather die trying than die giving them what they want."
Yep.
And that whole sequence could have been the episode, and then just give us the prison break, and I would have been happy.
But wait, there's more.
There's more. The shorting of the floor with the water, I was wondering what they were working on.
Right. I was like, why are we still doing this when we've got another plan? But it
was all part of the same plan.
It made sense. However, I was thinking about it at the time that it wouldn't, like, they were betting that somebody wasn't going to make it up onto the table in time. Like
yeah.
Because that's the only way it's going to short out.
Yeah.
So either somebody wasn't going to make it up on the table in time, or one of the guards or the new guy were going to step on the water and because they had to complete the electrical. They had to complete the circuit to short the floor out.
Yeah,
so.
yeah, and part of that is kind of the same conversation that Luthen is having with Bell and Lonnie, with the whole thing with Lonnie, where you have to make certain sacrifices.
Right.
You have to give up pawns and bishops every once in a while to get to the other person's king.
Well, and it leads us to the opening scene of Rogue One, where everybody was like, "Oh my God, Cassian just like kind of nonchalantly kills the guy because his arm is broken and he can't make it up the ladder."
Yep.
And it's like, well, here you go. Here's what got him there.
Yeah, and it's in the morality of rebellion. How you fight is just as important of why you fight. Because if you try to do what Saw does, which is fight on the Imperial's level, you blow up innocent kids, which is something that happens in the book.
And happens in real life.
And happens in real life. You are no different than the people you're fighting against if you do that kind of thing. But you also need to understand, this is kind of going on in Ukraine right now, is for a war or to stop a imperialistic setup, sometimes you have to make decisions that are get people killed.
Right. It's the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few.
And it's something that in the story of Star Wars, the Empire does everything possible to separate everybody out and to make them fearful to be the ones to step up and die.
Right.
And it takes Mothma and Cassian and General Draven and like all them to kind of start and small rebel cells like the Ghost Crew, like Saw's crew,
right,
to kind of show people that we can actually do this.
Yeah. And just thinking about it, this whole episode was really about that. Because like the next after or during the prison break, we go to Mothma in her apartments meeting, and I don't remember
I
what
don't remember the bad
his
guy.
name, but the guy who um, she's going to get this loan from to put back into her account so that the fact that she took all this money out doesn't raise questions. And he, wants to meet with her, and he's, obviously kind of douchey, whatever, and then says, "I don't need money." Basically he wants a favor, and she finds out from him that the favor is an introduction of his son to her daughter, which, I mean, he came right out and said, "I'm not asking for betrothal,"
Right, right.
and so, I mean, yeah, it's kind of icky because her daughter's 13, and you feel like you're prostituting your child, but you're also, I mean, but you're not. You're just
And it's the tradition of the Trandrillians.
right. But he's not even asking that.
Right,
He's
right.
just saying he wants an introduction, and that, to me, kind of on the surface, yeah, it feels icky, but it also like have a fucking party and invite him and his son
But
and
Mothma,
introduce the two. But she's like, she doesn't want to do it,
yep,
and so then she's going to have to make a decision. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the
yeah,
few being her daughter.
right. Which is a very Game of Thrones thing.
That's a Star Trek thing too.
It's well, but the concept of having to do things for the betterment of the realm by arranged marriages and that kind of setup. They kind of were. They kind of talked about that whole like sometimes you have to. What was the line? It was essentially the sometimes our position dictates our actions, is what he was telling Mothma with the whole process. And so that was when I was like, okay, so sometimes you have to do an arranged marriage, Rhaenyra, even though it's to somebody who has no interest in you.
Right.
And so like it was very
But that's
interesting.
not even what he was asking for.
It was,
But
but it wasn't. But that's how she took it. She took it as that, and considering her um, unhappiness with her marriage and unhappiness with her husband and her daughter being a teenage daughter, it was very interesting that she didn't instantly say yes to it because it's a sacrifice that she's not willing to do.
right, but she's going to.
She's going to, yeah.
I
Yeah,
mean, and he even said that.
yeah,
He's like, that's the first untruth. When he said, think about it or whatever, and she's like, I'm not going to. And he said that was the first untrue thing you said. So that's going to be her sacrifice,
right,
or
right.
one of many. There's always going to be a big one, right? There's got to be because your money and sacrificing yourself a lot of times doesn't really necessarily feel like a sacrifice if you believe in the
In the cause,
cause
yeah,
enough. And but to have to sacrifice your daughter, that's definitely going to sting a little bit more.
yeah, yeah. And I think that's going to be the first of many straws that are going to cause Mothma in season 2 to go full on the rebels side. I've talked about it in the past. I'm going to talk about it again. I really want them to do her like a hollow of her speech that she gives from the ghost, giving up her seat on the Senate to be the leader of the rebellion.
And I would assume they
I'm
would.
assuming that that's going to be towards the end of season 2, because all of that kind of happens in Rebels shortly before Rogue One happens.
Right.
Mothma is already a
Well, and
major
you
part.
can't. I mean, she's such a big part of this series so
Yeah,
far that you can't. And we know, if you've seen Road One, you know that she goes from where she's at today in the show to where she's at in Rogue One, and
right, right.
then on. So to not show people that haven't watched Rebels what happened, that kind of
I really think that that speech is going to be like the mid-season finale of
Maybe, yeah.
the rebellion is here kind of thing.
Yeah,
It definitely
maybe.
feels like that kind of thing that sets up there. The prison break is awesome. Look, if you've never been to one of our reviews discussions, we just kind of meander wherever the hell we want to go. The the idea of them just overwhelming because there's 5,000 prisoners and
Yeah.
not nearly enough guards,
Yeah.
and the guards all hiding. Like that was a big thing. I
Yeah.
love that because they are a bunch of freaking weenies, and
Yeah.
when they don't have the power, they're tiny. They're tiny little people,
Yeah.
and so Kino's speech of we can all do it together.
Yeah.
We have to do it all together, or it's not worth it. There's one way out, and one way out is up. And I kind of joked saying forward earlier, but it was up to the
For them. Yeah.
up to the surface, up to the water, and then the everybody getting out, them turning off the floors, turning off the generators, like all of that is just so good. And then you get to where everybody has a chance to jump and get out into the water and stuff, and Kino can't swim.
Yeah.
And so everybody has been talking about like Kino's going to sacrifice himself to get Cassian out,
Yeah.
and ultimately he didn't. He can't get out.
Right.
No matter what he does, he's stuck.
Yeah.
And he's always going to be stuck. And it's heartbreaking. And I hope we see Kino again. But if that's how we end, it's a heartbreaking story of a man who came to terms with the idea of, I'm going to die trying to get free, and I can never be free.
Yeah. Yep.
And like I could spend a whole like 25 minutes talking about just that, like that whole thing, and then Cassian trying to help him, and then gets taken out by
just get the mob.
the mob,
Yeah.
and going, and then the final scene of the episode, we'll kind of again we're jumping around, is him and Melshi running through the desert together, which is really kind of
Right.
like a cool kind of,
Because we knew, I mean, he's in Rogue One,
Yeah,
so we
yeah.
knew that they were somehow going to end up back together. So.
Yeah, but it was just interesting that it was just the two of them. Like I love
Yeah.
the shot of them looking down, the camera looking down on the prison, and it's the hexagon shape,
Yeah.
like the things that they were building. Again, I did a TikTok about this. I don't think those things are anything,
Right.
and so I think they're just built to keep everybody busy, and it's easier to keep somebody engaged if there's a game involved, and so like keep everybody compliant and stuff. But that shot of the hexagon thing, whatever, and then the fish, it's not fish, it's the prisoners,
Yeah.
all swimming away from that.
Yeah.
It was kind of a
different, like all the different points.
Yeah, it was cool.
Yep.
We get the Mothma stuff we talked about. Now we got to talk about Luthen. So we didn't have Luthen in the last couple episodes, if I remember correctly. And
If we did, it was short,
not like
not
impactful.
really. Yeah.
And his assistant, whose name I cannot remember off the top of my head, not on there. She comes to him and says, there was a mark on the statue. I went to a thing that I followed all the marks, and the piece was broken off. And Luthen was like, well, it's been over a year. It's probably a trap. And so he has some informant. I mean, they did it with Val and the assistant like
Right.
5 episodes ago.
Right.
Of like a private way of talking to each other,
Right.
and stuff like that. But so there's obviously somebody who has some information that's working for Luthen that needs to keep quiet, and come to find out, it's Lonnie
June,
June, who is
June.
one of the supervisors from the ISB. He's the one with the mustache.
The mustache.
And ultimately, what it comes down to is he's a double agent inside the ISB who spent 6 years working his way to the supervisor position to be in the room to get the information to share with Luthen, or to warn him of something is coming his way. And they have a full-on conversation where it's only on Lonnie in the lift, and it's all pretty much unbroken. It's just on him. It's not. It's a oneer. There's a couple of cuts in there, but it's a oneer. And he's talking to the Bluetooth earpiece from the mid 2000s, by the way. Um, but in that conversation, he starts spilling all the information about Deidre and the rest of the ISB and how they set up this fake for Draven,
Draven. Yeah.
the other one who is going to get trapped, caught in this trap and everything.
Yep.
And Luthen's telling him, "Well, I'm gonna let him fall into this trap and die to keep you safe, to keep you in your spot. Because if they find out that they were warned, they're gonna look for a spy
A
in there.
mole.
Yeah, a
Yeah.
mole.
And Lonnie's like, I got a baby now. I just want out. I can't keep living this double life. And he finally gets to the top of the elevator, and the doors open, and Luthen's standing there.
Yeah, which I found two things with that whole. I loved the him being in the lift because now he's in his. We talked about this last week. Everybody's in their cage of their own making. Now he's in this cage,
Yep.
talking to a disembodied voice.
Yeah.
That he hasn't talked to in so long, and the first thing that Luthen brings up is congratulations on your baby.
Yeah.
And so he instantly is on the defensive to sit there and say, "Are you watching me?" And he's like, "I haven't talked to you in a year. You're a new father. I haven't had the chance to say congratulations."
Right.
Like very charming kind of way of
Right.
saying, "Yeah, of course I'm watching you."
But it kind of gives us, like, I mean, ultimately, their relationship is not what you feel it is in the
Right.
beginning. You feel like um, Luthen's got something on him, and he's, kind of forcing him to do this
Right.
by, kind of making it sound like he's watching him, and almost making it sound like it's a threat against his child and everything. And then, by the end, you're like, oh, they're like, he's totally on the same
He's on
side.
their side. Yeah.
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 And he was just like, why are you watching me?
It's very. It feels very. As the reference that popped in my head was Departed. That they did this both sides, both the cops and the
Oh
mob,
yeah.
like did the slow process of getting somebody who came in on the bottom floor and worked their way up
Yeah.
to a position where they actually had, so that they can't really be tagged as the mole within the system because
Right.
they've been in there and worked their way up and
Right.
did things that were against what the actual rebellion or the mob or the police,
Right.
whatever it would have been.
Right.
And so like that whole thing is just I find it interesting that because of everything that happened in that, and then Luthen, when Lonnie says, "I want to get out," and Luthen says, "You made a vow," which is something that Val told Mon, and Mon had Luthen told it to her too.
Right. What vow are these people all making?
And from my point of view, as I sit right now with the information that we've been given, I'm not saying this is a definitive. Um, Luthen's the only center point of contact. Not everybody knows each other on purpose
Right.
to keep
Right.
everyone safe from each other.
Right.
The
But
only
everybody knows Luthen.
The only one that knows about Mothma is Luthen and the assistant.
Right.
Technically, what she's doing, her friend from
I mean, I guess
Trangilla,
the assistant knows.
right?
She knows.
Luthen and the assistant
Knows everybody.
Oh, everybody. Yeah.
As this far, anyway, she is known, or at least, I mean, she may not know who Lonnie is, but she knew.
She did say he.
Right, but that doesn't mean she knows his name
Right,
or
that's fair.
specifics about him. She could just know, there's a mole,
Inside
that it's
the
a he.
Empire, not necessarily ISB, but again, they left that kind of ambiguous enough to kind of sit there and say, what she knows. She in the past has been very much the aggressor of, we need to get rid of Cassian, we need to start cutting some of these ties because too many loose ends.
They're almost like the same, like one person, and Luthen is the emotional side, and she's the. This sounds very familiar. She's the analytical one. might be our relationship.
I feel so targeted right now. I am the emotional one who I'm the emotional one who will pick a fight and will stick with that fight and hold grudges for a really long time. And she's the one who analytically will sit there and say, "You need to wait. You need to wait. You need to wait. Kill him."
Yeah.
And then she'll also be the one who plans all of our trips, not down to like the last second, but like, here's all the coupons we have, and here's all the sales that we got, and all the
options. Look, now I feel targeted. Anyway, back to they're like they're
one unit,
one working as one entity.
Yeah. Which is interesting because, especially at this point in time in the Empire, having a rebel cell makes you a target. So Saw is a known rebel has been a known rebel since pre-Empire days, back during the Clone Wars, and he was working for against the Separatists.
But I don't feel like he's trying to hide it.
He's not trying to hide it. He's just trying to hide.
Right. Because he has to, because everybody knows who he is now. But I think like Luthen and the assistant and Mon are, they're kind of undercover, which for them works because they're working from the inside, which gets more information.
And like the whole series is like the whole beginning of the series was talking about like rebellions cost money.
Yeah.
And they're the ones in the heart of everything to steal or make or exchange money.
Right, where all the money is happening.
Yeah. So that makes a lot of sense. Luthen's speech to Lonnie, though, is just Lonnie asks him, "What if you sacrificed?"
Right.
And Luthen says, ultimately, he gets down to everything.
Yeah.
But he, like, the speech, like, I gave up light in my heart and love and friendship and kinship, and I gave up all of this stuff. And the day I made the decision 15 years ago, which was when the Emperor took over within the timeline that we're sitting right now, and he made the decision at that point that he was going to fight against it. And so every decision he's made along the way has been to essentially start the rebellion. We're not there yet, but the seeds are being planted. The seeds have been planted the whole way, and now we're getting the first sprouts of those seeds.
Yeah, and I liked his. I'm going to make sure others, or I'm going to make sure there's a sunrise, even if I'm not there to see it.
Yeah, like that. Bookends of this episode. You've got Cassian at the front saying, "I'd rather die trying to kill them than having them try to kill me for something, doing something that they like. I'm willing to die for the cause instead of just dying while they force me
for the Empire."
It's about the prison specifically, but he's talking about the Empire and the rebellion. And then you got the Luthen at the back end saying, "I'm willing to do stuff that I know I'm not going to be able to enjoy for the next generation."
Right.
And so that was bookends of both of those themes, but also speeches, is what all of Star Wars and the rebellion is about.
Right.
And people are like, the show is so good, and they're really showing the dark side of the Empire, and I've been really like on like that train, but I came to a realization as we're talking about it and watching this episode, this has been the Star Wars story the entire time,
just not as hardcore, right? I mean, you're not like the in the New Hope trilogy, the hardest thing that happens is Luke loses his arm.
Well, Obi-Wan dies.
Well,
Obi-Wan becomes one with the Force.
But you've been with him for 2 seconds. Right. You haven't even formed an emotional, attachment. I was like, when I was 10 and I saw that movie, I was like, oh, that sucks. The old guy died. The old guy's dead. We haven't even gotten to know him yet, and let's move on to Pew Pew, whatever. I mean, now looking back, it's like, oh, Obi-Wan died. But, it was much more toned down. And now we're getting to see some more, more real life or death stakes.
Right.
But they were there, and you have to, like, Han coming to terms with I'm only in it for the money to joining the rebellion.
Right,
You
right,
know,
right.
they understood. I mean, Leia was like, "Yep."
Well,
She never came out and said it, but she was ready to die for it, and her family died for it.
yeah, 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 yeah.
So it was there. It was just really sucked because
Because George
kids.
was making something for 12-year-olds to
Yeah,
understand what the morality of the world was and the conflict between the Viet Cong and the U.S.
right. And
And
you don't have to slap 12-year-olds in the face with "You're gonna die."
right, well, no, but he wasn't doing necessarily that you're going to die, but he was definitely doing the always choose hope, always try to
Yeah,
find a better way, find a non-conflict way of doing things. And now us as adults who grew up on that are now having this conversation about what's going on in Andor, and it's one heartwarming for me to have people who were in it for the pew pew are actually starting to understand this is the political conversation of our lifetime.
yeah, okay.
All of us in our age group who grew up with the Star Wars, that has been this is even the prequels. I know people don't like the prequels. Watch those movies again. The 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 line that Padme gives, "This is how democracy dies," the thunderous applause, is is not for 12-year-olds. It's for the 30-year-olds who took their 12-year-olds to the movies.
Yeah, and they're voting.
And they're voting, and so just what they're talking about in the show, and not giving us the pew pew, not giving us the space wizards, not giving us the cool spaceships. Yeah, sure, we got TIE fighters in one episode,
Yeah,
but
there's a
we're
little pew pew in this
a
episode.
little bit of pew pew in this episode, but it's not relying on that. It
Right.
is actually talking about what this whole saga, this whole story, this whole mythology is actually trying to teach people. And a lot of people are like, this is really good. I never really knew that Star Wars could do this. And I'm like, this was the point of Star Wars the whole way. And
Right.
and a lot of people who are saying that, I'm going to back up a little bit on that statement, because a lot of people who are saying that grew up with the shiny, fun fall of Anakin in the prequels.
Hmm.
And they've only done the prequels and then gone back and watched the original
Right.
trilogy,
Right.
and so they haven't spent time in the expanded universe or watched Clone Wars or like kind of that
Right.
stuff.
Well, and even if you've just watched the movies, I mean, you know, uh, as an adult, understand rebellions are usually a good thing because they're the little guy coming out and putting their foot down against what the big guy. Um, but I never had like kind of the backstory or just the how the rebellion got going, and
Right, right.
and so it's been interesting.
Yeah, yeah. And I just love what they're doing in the show, in this episode specifically. Just like we were talking about earlier, we spent so much time ratcheting it up to have that, even if it was a small release, but that release of all that pressure. And now we still have 2 episodes left, and it's now going to be Cassian on a Vision Quest. Vision Quest, not the right word, but a, a Vision Quest to find his place in what the rebellion's going to be.
Right. Well, and everybody's looking for him, but
Yep.
he doesn't know that.
Nope.
So he
Now he's
might
on the
go back
run.
to
Uh,
Karn.
Ferrex is the planet
Oh,
where we
is that
start off.
is Karn where he was born or
Karn, I
whatever?
think Karn's where he
Karn.
was born. Yeah.
So he's potentially going to go back there, and everyone is there waiting
And
for
I
him to come
find it
back.
very interesting that they showed Ferrex for a hot minute, and um, uh, Hila, can't remember her name, who's scoping out.
Right. She's just hanging out by his
Right.
mom's place, waiting for him to come back.
So Cassian's gonna get there just as she died, just like right after she died, and she's gonna be there to try to kill him, and he's gonna be like, no.
Yeah.
and like you need to get me to Luthen now
Yeah.
because we have bigger fish to fry.
Yeah.
And that's why I think it's going, but I can't, you know, with anything else that's happened in the show, um, speculating about where they're telling the story going forward. The only thing that we've gotten right is the prison break this week.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, everybody knew that that was going to happen. We
Yeah.
just weren't sure how, and it wasn't how we expected it to be. But I'm good with it.
I'm cool with it. And we talked about this when we were watching Miss Marvel. That's part of the fun we have in these conversations is what we think it's going towards and what
Right.
the next episode's going to be and whatever.
Right.
And I said early on that I was just going to let Miss Marvel come to me because I didn't have any knowledge of that character.
Right.
And this has kind of been the same thing, but the difference for me in this has been I have the knowledge of what's going on in this world right now.
Well, you have like here and here, but you don't have the
that
fill
that
in.
gap in the middle,
Yeah.
which I'm really glad that they're kind of going in and filling that gap, that 19-year gap between A New Hope or Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope. I like that they're kind of telling. Some people don't like that. I also like that they're doing it with Mandalorian and Boba Fett with that whole Mandoverse of telling the stories after Return of the Jedi and before we get to a Force Awakens,
Yep.
which is I think a 30-year gap. I
Yeah.
think it's like a
Yeah.
something like that. So, but that whole like going in, some people are like, oh, they're retconning the stories. No, they're filling in. Star Wars is all about tip of the iceberg storytelling that Joseph Scrimshaw says all the time on Force Center, and they're going in and giving us more and more of that iceberg to build up the stuff that we love.
Yeah.
So something more that
and then it makes it so you can go back and rewatch all those like the 9 movies again and go, now it's backwards, right?
Right.
They didn't put that quote in there because of what we're learning now. What we're learning now is because that quote was
Yep.
in there, but it gives it a whole new texture, of something like it could be something throwaway that you're like, oh, that meant so much now.
The example that everybody's been giving this week is the mash cut when they went to torture Bix.
Mm-hmm.
So they show Bix going into the chair, the door slides closed, they pan down to the Imperial's feet walking by.
Mm-hmm.
That's shot for shot Leia being tortured by
Mm-hmm.
Vader with the door closing and down
Mm-hmm.
the feet. So now when we go watch New Hope again, a movie that's 45 years old,
Judge your mouth.
we now have an even deeper emotional connection to a scene that we've lived with for so long.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so this is not retconning. And so like I just love what they're doing with this storytelling process with the Mandoverse, with the Tales of the Jedi, filling in gaps to give us even more to chew on when we go back and rewatch all of this stuff, because the reason we love Star Wars so much is the rewatchability.
Yeah.
Now that our platform is done, we're not being political this week, but we're being emotional.
Oh. Okay.
Let us know what you thought of this discussion and review of episode 10 of Andor, One Way Out. Let us know in the comments down below. Please be nice. That's a requirement around here. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell for notifications, and follow us on all the social media stuff, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Links in the description down below. And until next time, cult members, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.